where we left off with that last demo. And there's actually so based on the way that I had things split up, there was one last bit of functionality that I wanted to add last week and then or last class, and then we just sort of ran out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one more sprite and one more object, and this new sprite is going to be sp_door, and we're just going to create a little door object that the player can reach at the end of the level, and that'll represent the win condition for that level. So then they'll go to the next room or wherever you want them to go. So I'm going to edit the image, and it's up to you exactly what you want your door to look like. I'm just going to make a rectangle, and I'm going to put a circular doorknob on it. Boop. Nope, because that's the wrong tool. There we go. Boop. All done. Okay, this is all I'm going to do for it. And then I'm going to create the object for it. ob_door. Associate the sprite that I just made with this object. And then we only need one event, and this is going to be a collision event. So if click on add event and then go down to collision, and then it will ask you what object you want to have collision trigger this event with. And so it's between the door and the player. So we want something to happen when the player object collides with this door object in our room. And what we want is this one, which is just go to next room. So it's a little drag and drop chunk of code. If you search for room at the top, it should filter and give you this, just looks like a little maroon arrow pointing right, and that's to go to the next room. Now, in case you're wondering, how does it know what the next room is? Eventually, when we have multiple rooms here in our list, we will be able to dictate that based on, if you click on this little house icon indicates the starting room for your game. And then in here, where it says room order, once we have multiple rooms, we can click and drag and rearrange them. And whichever room is next on that list is where it would take you to. So let's just test what we have right now. So if I go back to my room editor, and I'm going to drag and drop my door object and place it somewhere on the right here, and I'll hit play so that it builds this and we can test it. So right now I'm able to walk and jump and move my character towards that door, and when I collide with it, it gives me an error. And this is because it's looking for a next room to take us to, but it doesn't have one yet. But that's okay. For right now, that error is success. We are totally fine with having that error right now. It actually means that our code is working because it's looking for that next room to take us to. Okay. Questions on how to do that, or do you need a minute to sort of catch up? I know I kind of flew through that, but all right. So just general rule, if I'm going too fast or if you need me to repeat, always just interject and stop me. I don't mind. Okay. So our next goal is going to be to make a room that exists beyond just this sort of default height and width here, so that we can create a more interesting experience by having it actually, move left to right beyond these dimensions. So in order to start that process, I'm gonna make sure again that we're on our room editor, and then we are going to, right here where it says room settings, I'm going to change this value, which was 1024. I'm going to change it to 5,000. And if I hit enter, you'll see that it automatically expands our room. If we zoom out here, so now it's 5,000 pixels wide. I don't need to change the height. And we have a lot more literally room to play with here. Now, the big issue would be that if we ran our game as it is, it would try to squish this entire area down into the same size window that we had when our room was only about 1,000 pixels wide. That is obviously no good. So what we're going to do is, again, down in room settings, down in the lower left of our room editor, there's a little arrow next to viewports and cameras. So click on that to expand it. And then I'm going to check the first box that says enable viewports. And then I'm going to go to down here, viewport 0 is the one that is going to be used. These viewports are all just essentially different like cameras that you could have in your game to literally view different areas or switch between them if you needed to be able to quickly go from one part of the game to another. But for us, we are just going to keep it simple. We're just going to establish one viewport, and we're going to have that follow the player. So I clicked enable viewports, and then I expanded viewport 0. It's 0 because a lot of computer science stuff starts counting at 0, but it's the first one. And then I checked this little visible box, and hopefully you should see in your room editor now there's a big rectangle around the left end of our room here. And so that rectangle represents our new camera, our new visible portion of the game. Question in the chat. What did you do for the door to make it work? Yeah, it was just, so if you go to the door object, first I associated it with the door sprite here, and then I clicked on add event, and hello, Carolina. And so I did add event, collision, objects, and then with the player, because we care about what happens when the player object hits that door object. So once that's set up, I can put anything I want in here, and this is what's going to happen when those two objects collide. And then I just dragged and dropped this little chunk of code, which is go to next room, which I found by searching the toolbox for the word room, and it's this one that looks like an arrow pointing right. You see all these other options. Go to a specific room, reload the current room, which we're going to use later actually, previous room and next room, right? Does that cover it? Is that good? Okay. Cool. All right, so back to our room editor. So the idea is that we're going to be able to move through this larger space, this newly larger space, but keep only this section that's inside the rectangle visible at any one time. So everything outside the rectangle is not going to be visible. So ultimately, we're going to want the camera, the viewport, to follow our player so that when the player moves into what would be off screen, the camera moves with them. But in order to give them some place to go, let's highlight our block object. And if you remember from last time, I said you could hold Alt and then just sort of click and drag, and you can draw with that object. So you can make this look like whatever you want it to, as long as we are able to move from left to right and get to the end here. If you want to leave some gaps, that would be cool, because gaps in a platformer make it a little bit challenging. Ultimately, by the end of today, we're going to have 3 different obstacles for our player to overcome. One is not falling in gaps. 2 is going to be little enemies that fly around, and 3 is going to be things falling from the sky trying to crush our hero. So you can sort of start getting yourself in that headspace as far as how you want to design it. And between tonight and Thursday, one of your optional homeworks will be to basically perfect this level layout, in a way that you enjoy most. So today I was just almost randomly dragging and creating a level design, but when you want to make it better, you can go and revisit it between now and next workshop. Okay, so right now I just have a room full of block objects, which technically looks like it can be traversed mostly. I think most of it. I want to make sure that character is going to be able to make all the jumps, but I can always go back and edit it later. So, okay, everything there is set. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do in order to test that our viewport is working is, again, under viewports and cameras and under viewport 0, if we keep scrolling down, these bits of information here are very important. So this first one is a little menu that says object following. And so this is where we can determine what we want the camera to keep visible. So we want it to follow the player object, at least for now. And then where it says horizontal border and vertical border, horizontal speed and vertical speed. What this means by border is how close do you want to allow that object to get to the edge of the screen before I start moving the camera to meet that object. So right now it's at 32 pixels, which is right up next to the edge of the screen, right? Not a lot of space at all. And the horizontal and vertical speed, this is asking, once the player gets within this border, how quickly do you want me to snap the camera to follow that object? So if it's at -1, -1 in GameMaker typically represents a value of like being off. So what this means is if it's off, there will be no delay at all. So the moment our player character gets within 32 pixels, if it goes to 30 pixels, it'll move 2 pixels over immediately in order to meet it, in order to keep it on the frame. So if we increase this value, anything above 0 is basically going to mean how many frames per second, how many steps do you want me to take to catch up to the character? So if you make this a very large value, the camera will sort of lag and eventually it'll catch up to the player. Now you might think, well, why would we want that at all? Why wouldn't we want it to just be -1 all the time? Well, for now, it's not such a big deal when we're just following this player. But before the end of today, I will show you why you might want to change it. So for right now, let's just change the horizontal border to 400 and the vertical border to 200. I don't have a need for the vertical border because you can see the rectangle that I've got perfectly lines up vertically with the height of our room. But if you want to change that between after tonight's session and Thursday, then the vertical border will become important, and so will the vertical speed. Okay, so let's just test what we've got so far. All right, so we have our player character, and actually I'm remembering that I did not move the door, so let's see if I can make it. Nope, okay. All right, so let's move this door object. You can literally just click and drag it in the room to move it. You don't need to place a new door and delete it or anything like that. Okay, now let's test again. All right, so my player character is moving, and we're getting right close to 400 pixels away from the edge. And you see, as I move the player character 400 pixels from the right edge of the screen, the camera adjusts to keep that player in the middle of the viewport. Same thing if I try to move to the left. So essentially, this is working. However, um, and I would especially like to hear from people who haven't taken DMS 120. But what is the maybe not problem? What is the imperfection here? Why is this not really ideal, aside from the fact that my character can't make this jump? What is not quite ideal about the camera movement as it is right now? Anybody? Best part of any class, asking for input from students. Let's see. What is not ideal, as in how it looks like? Well, if you were playing this game, and let's imagine that there are things in the room that can end your game, as opposed to right now where there's really no conflict or danger or anything. Uh, why would this not quite be ideal? Yeah, exactly. So you can't see far ahead, right? The fact that the way that this works, most of the screen, most of the board is behind your character by the time you're getting close enough to the edge for it to matter, right? For it to matter in terms of the camera movement. So this would not be a great way to play a game because once you're past something in a platformer, you don't really care about it as much. Um, so we want to be able to see things as we're approaching them. Now, you could want something similar to this if it was the kind of game where something was chasing the player character, right? You had stuff behind them, and you wanted to be able to see that. Then maybe something like this would be good. But what we're going to do is improve upon this. So we're going to do that by I'm going to add a new sprite, create sprite, and I'm going to call it sp underscore cam for camera. And I'm actually going to edit the dimensions of it because just it'll look better. So I'm going to make it smaller. So this is the first time we're doing this, I believe. So the default dimensions for all of our sprites have been 64 pixels wide by 64 pixels tall. And if you click this little uh, 4 diagonal arrows icon here, you get a couple different options on how to resize this canvas. Right now, I don't have anything in it, so it doesn't matter whether I click resize or scale, does not matter. So I'm going to change one of the values to be 32. And since this little checkbox is clicked to maintain the aspect ratio, it's going to change the other one to 32 as well. And then I will hit apply. And now our new dimensions that we're working with are 32 pixels by 32 pixels, just making it half as big. And what I'm going to make in here is just a little crosshair. And it really doesn't matter what this looks like. Honestly, if you felt like being lazy, you could just, this could be your sprite because we are ultimately going to make this invisible eventually. But for right now, I think it helps as a learning tool to be able to see where it is. So I'm using this line tool here, and I'm just going to make a red plus. And for those of you that are, maybe if you change the background color to something that is red, you want to make sure that it's visible against multiple colors, just choose a second color. And we're just making a little crosshair. I'm going to set the origin point once again to be middle center. And this is going to help it line up with our player object, because that's ultimately what we're going to do, is have it be like right in line horizontally with our player character. So making sure that the origin point is centered, just like we have it centered for our player object, will be helpful. And I'm going to create a camera object to go with it. OB_cam. Associate this sprite we just made with this object. And for this, we're still not really typing out code. Once again, we're just going to use some drag and drop chunks of pre-made code. So I'm going to click add event, and at the create event, I'm going to use a chunk called jump to point. And all this is going to do is just say, since the create event only runs one time, which is when this object is first loaded into memory, when it's first rendered, when it's first created, we're just going to have our object move to the point that I'm about to type in right now. So we're going to give an X and Y coordinate for where we want this object to move to the moment that it loads into our game. And the way we're going to do this is by referencing the player object. So I'm going to type the name of that player object, which is OB_player, and then I'll use something called dot notation, which allows us to reference variables from other objects. So OB_player.x refers to the value of the x coordinate of the player. And then I'm going to do the same thing for OB_player.y. And so don't like when it does that, player.y. And so right now, what we told it to do, since this is the create event, is just say, as soon as the game loads up, as soon as this object is loaded into memory, change the X and Y values of this object to be identical to the X and Y values of the player, right? So we're setting our X to be equal to the player's X. We're setting our Y to be equal to the player's Y. So right now, at the start of the game, the camera object would just jump to being right on top of the player. That's good, not quite complete. We instead want it to be, we can change that relative value by saying player X value plus 300. And if you remember from last time, so in Game Maker, negative values go to the left, positive values go to the right, negative values go up, positive values go down. So 300 additional pixels added on to the X value is going to be 300 pixels to the right of the player. So we're setting this camera object to, as soon as the game starts, to jump to be vertically in line with the player, but horizontally 300 pixels to the right. And then, but that's just to start. So we also need an event to maintain this. So we want a step event, because step events execute every possible step or frame or moment of processing that our game allows. So step events happen all the time. They happen constantly. Create event just happens once. Step event happens all the time. And so what I'm going to do here is just say assign variable. And if you need to search for it, you can just type in assign. It's this one with the blue arrow pointing down, and it says assign. And what we want to change here is the Y value of our camera object. And we want to set that to always be the player's Y value. Every time. I'm not going to get used to it. Okay. So in our create object, or I'm sorry, our create event for this object, it's going to jump to this point, which is in line with the player's vertical position and 300 pixels to the right. And then we're going to make sure every possible moment in the game, it is maintaining this vertical position comparable to the player. Okay, so it's always going to be in that position. So let's just see what we have so far. You need to put the camera object in the room in order to have it exist in the game. So I'm going to drag and drop our camera object into the room, and you'll notice it doesn't matter where I put it, right? I can place it up here because the very first moment that it's loaded into this game, we set it to jump to a certain point. So let's do that right now. So it runs, and as you can see, the camera object is 300 pixels to the right of our player, and it is vertically right in line with our player. And I can test this because when I jump up and down, it stays perfectly in line with our player. But the problem is we didn't give it any instructions in terms of where it should stay horizontally in relation to the player. So we've made progress, but we're not quite there yet. And now let me pause and just ask anyone having issues getting to that point. Everyone good? Everyone good? I'm hearing nothing. I'm assuming silence is golden, as they say. How is everyone doing? Oh, I see a thumbs up from Noah. Thanks, Noah. How is everyone? Let's just real quick. Celine is indeed, I know, it's just a typo. Let's take a moment and let's just say, how are we? How is everyone? It's Tuesday, everyone's favorite night of the week. Tuesday is garbage and recycling night around these parts, so that's exciting.
We've been looking forward to it. Yeah, fine. Just
okay.
I think we're getting a lot of chatter in the chat, and
Okay.
I do think that silence is golden.
Okay, good.
Lena has said, yeah.
Just want to make sure. Just want to, make sure everyone's doing all right. Okay. We will move on then.
So Noah has a question in the chat.
Yes. And the crowd moves up and down, doesn't move. Yes, yep, that's exactly where you should be right now. Yep. You are good. Okay. We are going to address that right now. So I'm going to go back to the player object. We're going to revisit this code, which we haven't in a little bit. And let me just see if I think this is on your. Yeah, does everyone still have access to the code that the Word document that I put on Box for people to download with the chunks of code sort of pre-typed for everyone? If not, you can take a minute to go get it. I can actually paste the link in the chat once again.
Joe, if you do have access to it, I think that would be a good idea. If you could just drop it in the chat.
Yep. This should be it. I hope that's it. Someone can confirm if this is indeed it. Yay. Okay, good. So make sure that you have that And where we are at today is it's the first one on under where it says workshop day 2. The step event for the player. So you can just copy that and make sure you're on the step event for the player. We had a ton of stuff in there already, but you can just add this right at the very bottom. Make sure you paste it right out of Microsoft Word, because otherwise it does some undesired formatting. Okay, camera object location. So I'll give everyone just a moment to locate that code, copy and paste it. Remember, we're in the player object, not the camera object right now, and we're in the step event. And we already had all of our execute code typed from before, so I'm just adding this at the bottom. Okay, assuming we're all there. So this code is super simple. All this is saying is if the player inputs the right key, then change the value, change the location of our camera object to be our current x plus 300. If they hit left, change it to be our current x minus 300. In other words, we're sort of cheating a little bit, because we're sort of piggybacking this code on top of the code that's already going to be used to determine the player character's location. So we're just saying very basically, if they're pushing right, they must be trying to move right. So let's move our camera accordingly with that. And then same thing with left. Again, positive values are to the right, negative values are to the left. So we should be all set with that in there. So let's test our code again. And so now the object moves with us both vertically and horizontally according to the direction that we're trying to move. So this is why before we didn't want to hard code in one particular horizontal location for this object, because we want it to be able to change depending on which way our character is moving. And so building off of that, so now that we have this little camera object and it's moving in front of our player character at all times, now we can get one step closer to our goal, which is, so if we go back to our room editor, and again, down in the lower left, under cameras and viewports, under viewport 0, we're just going to change where we had the object following to be the player, and we're just going to change that to our camera object. It's telling me unassigned variable for reference. Okay. Did you name the camera object in here? Is it exactly ob_cam? Ah, indeed. Yeah, so it's just because it's looking for exactly that object and then the X value of it. So yeah, so you can just I think the easier thing to do would just be to right click on it here and just select rename and just change it to that. And while you're doing that, so the camera is now set to follow our camera object, the camera in our game, right? The viewport, I should say. So now if I run this, let's see how we're doing. Okay, so I can move, and as our camera object gets 400 pixels from the edge of the screen, now our viewport is using that as the anchor for when to start moving. Now the issue is, as you can see here, if the player is going to move back and forth rapidly, it's a little bit jarring because we have those speeds, our camera speeds, set to -1. And oh, actually, yeah, I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, you are seeing when I test the game, right? Everyone is seeing that right here. Okay, just want to check because it technically launches like a new window, so I just want to make sure that's visible. Okay, so when I go back and forth here, this sort of stuttering by the video is not ideal. So this is where we're going to change our um, horizontal speed. And even though I'm not using it, you can change your vertical speed at the same time, just in case you want to use it for your game later. So I'm going to change them both to 20. And all this means is it's going to take 20 frames or 20 steps to get from the camera object's current position to whatever its new position is. And that'll make it so as we are moving, it's pretty darn instantaneous as we're moving in one direction. But then when we change directions, it's a lot less jarring. It doesn't snap instantly. It takes, a third of a second or not even to catch up. So it's just a little bit smoother. And of course, you can change that value if you wanted it to be even more smooth. You just increase that value. But the higher that you increase that value, the more you run into having there be like a little bit of a delay or a little bit of a catch up between the character moving and the camera being able to stay with it, essentially. And if you feel that 400 pixels is still not enough lead room for your character to be able to see what's coming, then you can just increase that value. And in fact, I think I'm going to change it to 600 because I think that'll be better. And again, the value I was changing is just where it says horizontal border. I just changed it to 600. And actually now it's even more pronounced. You can see how when I change directions, the camera kind of takes a split second to catch up. And that way it's just not so jarring. Okay. Questions up until that point? I think we're pretty perfect on time. Okay. No questions? Everyone all right? Works as it should. One thing we'll do right away, real quick, is if you double click on the camera object. So by default, all objects are visible, but we actually don't want that. This is why I said it doesn't really matter what you draw for this camera sprite. So I'm going to uncheck visible. And then now if I run the game, everything is the same function-wise, and that object is still in the exact same place. We just can't see it. So now we get all of the functionality that we want, but without a big, ugly plus sign in the middle. Okay. So now let's start adding some challenges. So right now we've, up until this point, which is like halfway through this entire workshop, all we've been doing is trying to build a world where our character can move around in a reasonably comfortable way. But as we know, games should have some ability to both fail as well as succeed. So let's start building some of that in. So we've got some gaps in our floor in this room, and that is a common loss condition for platformers is falling. So in order to build that in, what I'm going to do is create a new event for our player. And this event is under other because the other events is just sort of like, this is sort of like the random odds and ends that don't really fit into the other categories. But the first event under other is outside room. And what this means is that any code that I enter here is going to trigger when this object falls outside of the room. In other words, outside of the blue area, right? And that's exactly what happens, even though the camera won't follow it, because the camera, the viewport settings in GameMaker are smart enough to not follow something that goes outside of the room. It's the understanding is that outside of this room is like non-existent space in terms of how the game is concerned. So the player can fall outside of the room and the camera won't follow them. And normally what would happen up until this point is technically that player would just be falling forever and there would be nothing to stop them. And if you had it print the Y value to the screen, you would just see that Y value getting bigger and bigger and bigger constantly forever, right? So what we want to do is just make it so that when the character falls outside of the room, we want to execute this this little chunk, which is restart room. So if you search for restart up here, and it's this maroon block that's got the little circle coming around and pointing it back to itself. And all you need to do is drag and drop it in there. And so if I run this right now, what will happen is, so I'm playing my game and I'm trying to make all these jumps, but let's say I'm not very good at this jump. You fall out the bottom of the level and it restarts. Now, just in case anyone wants to test some imperfections of this code, right now, just walking to the left would be the same thing as exiting the room, right? So this code also, since I don't have anywhere, well, I don't have any space above this level. So it would be the same thing if I had some functionality in the game that, let's say, like shot our character way up and they were able to jump out the top of the level, it would trigger the event in the same way. So for our purposes, again, just to kind of keep things simple, we're assuming that the character is only going to have to worry about falling out the bottom of the level. So that's what the code is designed to do. You could, of course, have a more sophisticated version of this code, which would be slightly more complicated, which is just basically, you would say if the player character reaches a certain Y value, right? If the player character's Y value exceeds some amount that represents the bottom of the screen, then restart the room. But I just did it in one chunk of code to try to make it easier. You would need exceptions to account for the left and go. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you could, right. There's all sorts of different ways that you could code it in order to account for that. Yeah, and just to make everyone feel comfortable, I mean, there's also all sorts of ways that you could like cheese this, so to speak. Like you could, I'm pretty sure this will work. Oh, that's the spread. So let's just test this theory. So I could just build blocks around here. And I'm pretty sure this will also work. Yeah. So there's other ways to get around it. Anyway, and I just present that just because like you don't need to get in the habit of thinking like there's only one right way to do this. Everything that I've done so far, I mean, there's at least two or three, but most of the time half a dozen different ways that you could have written this code or structured the code for this game or anything like that. But okay, moving on. So that's our first challenge is the falling out the bottom of the screen. Second one is we are finally going to create an enemy character. So I'm going to create a new sprite, sp underscore enemy, edit the image, and really, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you can make this look like whatever you want. Those of you that have taken 120 will recognize my classic circle with an angry face on it. Oh, still making a circle. Yep. And I always give them big scary fangs too. There we go. Actually, as I'm looking at it, I'm just now realizing how this is basically just a Goomba from Mario Brothers, but without any of the mushroom shape. So there is that. Exactly, right? See, it's a demon. It's
I
a
was just gonna
scary.
say you got to patent this character. It's gonna be the next big
Yeah,
character.
totally. I mean, it's all, it's not that far from like the Red Angry Bird. It's like all right there.
Hot take: every character in gaming exactly the same character. No.
Okay, so make the sprite whatever you want. Um, Once again, I'm gonna set the uh, origin to be middle center. For what I'm gonna do with this enemy, does it need to be middle center? Probably not. But usually you're gonna want anything that's gonna interact with your player character to probably use the same origin points. So anyway, okay, so middle center. I'm not doing animations. You can do animations, between now and next session if you'd like, and you can make it something cooler than this, if that's even possible, on your own time. Okay, so of course I need to make an object that goes along with this sprite. So create object ob underscore enemy. Associate the sprite accordingly, and then let's see. Yes, I did give you this code. So even though it's like 3 lines of code, this is the next thing in that Word document with the code snippets in it. So this is going to be a step event. So add event under the enemy object, click step, and then step. And then I'm going to use this execute code widget here and just paste in what I copied. And then I'll explain this in a moment. We have, see if you can all see my drink of choice here tonight. We have 9 parts water, 1 part grape juice. Got to keep the sugar intake down. Pandemic has not been good for the carb intake for me.
How do you measure out 9 parts water? I'm
Oh,
sorry,
you just eyeball it. You don't have to get too precise.
but like 9 parts is really precise. That's the thing.
It's approximate.
Right, just a little bit guesstimated.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I am pretty proud of these 3 lines of code. So, okay. So in order to move in GameMaker, you only need 2 things. You need speed and direction. And speed is just, how much distance do you want me to cover? And direction is obviously in what direction do you want me to cover that distance. So we haven't set the speed yet. We're going to do that in a moment. Direction is a built-in variable. And so I mentioned like gravity last time. I said we weren't going to call our variable gravity because gravity was already built in. We were going to use our own. But we're going to use the built-in direction here. So GameMaker understands speed and direction as it relates to any object. So the direction operates on the usual 360-degree wheel that you're used to thinking of. The only thing that might be a little bit off is I can't remember if 0 is up or if 0 is right in GameMaker. It's irrelevant for right now. So all we're doing is we're saying every possible step, right? So this is a step event. So it's running as frequently as possible. Every step, we're going to change the direction. We're going to add 10 to whatever it is. So this syntax here, we have plus equals. This just means that you are adding 10 to whatever the current value is. So this would be the same thing as if I wrote direction equals direction plus 10, right? These 2 lines are exactly the same. So what we're doing here is we're taking our current value for direction, whatever it is. Let's say our current direction is 180. We'd be saying 180 equals 180 plus 10, in other words, 190, right? So it's the same thing here. Plus equals, you're just taking the current value and adding to it. If you did minus equals, it would be take the current value and subtract 10 from it. So every second we are changing our direction 10 degrees, right? And then all we're saying is if direction is equal to, so the double equal signs is like asking a question. It's like saying, is it equal to 360? So if direction is equal to 360, then set it to 0. All that's going to allow us to do is just keep looping through all the, it's going to go 10, 20, 30, 40, all the way up to 360. When it hits 360, it's going to be reset down to 0. And all this is going to do is allow that direction to keep spinning. And we're going to pair this with, we're going to do set speed. This one, the little 3 triangles pointing to the right, set speed. So I'm going to drag this chunk in just above our execute code, and it's going to ask, basically, do you want this speed to be horizontal, vertical, or do you want it to apply to direction? We want it to apply to the direction. Speed, obviously, like I said, it's how many pixels per frame do you want us to move? So I'm going to set it to 10 for right now. All right, so I have a set speed chunk, type is direction, speed is 10, and then underneath that I have some code, direction plus equals 10. If direction is equal to 360, then set direction to 0. Basically just start that loop over again. All right. So now that's all set, if we go back to our room and I just place an enemy in that room anywhere and then run it, we will see what happens. Okay, so it moves around in a circle. That's exactly what we want. Now, how would we change this if we wanted to. Basically, we have two different values that we can play with. We have how often does it, or how much of a degree does it change its direction every step, right? So we can change that. And also how fast does it move? So we can play with those two different values to get either bigger circles or smaller circles. We could make it move more slowly in the same size circle, right? So we can change it. The important thing to keep in mind, though, is that because direction and speed are kind of attached to each other, um, you can't really edit one value. Like if I just change the speed right now, um, I think it will also change the size of the circle. So if you wanted the exact same size circle, but at a different speed, you would have to change the increment of the directions as well. So let's try that. Right. So double the speed is roughly, it's a bigger circle. And the reason for that is just because it's covering more distance before that increment changes, right? So if you want to play around with this, just know that these two values are interconnected, but I'm going to leave it at 10. And then we want to do, in order to actually make it a challenge, because right now the player could just walk right through this enemy and nothing would happen. And so that's not really much of a challenge. So we want to do add event, collision, object, player. So when the enemy object collides with the player, and again, there's all sorts of things that you could do, right? If we were instituting some sort of like health system, you could have it where it took away health or something like that, but I'm keeping everything super simple, so we're just going to restart the room. So we're kind of I'm sure you've played games like this where in some ways it's actually rather frustrating because you just keep starting the same room over and over again. But yep, so that was me jumping into the enemy, and it just puts me back at the beginning. Oop. Okay, so again, between after we wrap up tonight and Thursday, one of your tasks will be, place enemies um, in, however you want throughout the room. Direction, yep, absolutely. Okay, so we have our two challenges in place now for our third and final one. And I think, so we got 24 minutes left, and this is the last thing we're gonna do. So yeah, this should time out very well. Okay, so I said that the third challenge was gonna be stuff falling from the sky. So let's create a sprite. Hopefully you're getting used to the pattern established between you create a sprite, create an object, you give the object attributes and behavior, you throw the object in the room. That's just that's how it goes. So I'm going to call these comets. If you want to make it narratively something different, you can do that later. And I don't think it even really matters for our code if you have it called comets or not. So if you want to make something else, that's fine. Edit the image. For whatever reason, I'm gonna, actually I know what's reason. So I'm gonna show you how to use layers. So layers are down here underneath the colors and the toolbox in the image editor. There are much better programs out there for doing stuff like this. So there's one called Asprite, Asprite, I believe is how it's spelled. And that's sort of like becoming the industry standard for like indie game 2D pixel art animation. So that one is probably what you would really want to use. But if you just wanted to stick with Game Maker, you'd want to know how to make different layers. And if you've worked with something like Photoshop or really any digital image manipulation software, you're used to how layers work. But I'll show you here in a moment. So I'm going to make something akin to a comet. So I'm going to start with a black circle. And actually, let's give myself a little bit more space here. Good enough. Black circle on one layer. And down here at the very bottom, so this icon looks like a little sheet of paper with a folded corner. Add layer to all frames. So now we have two layers. And this works just like if you're used to Photoshop or anything, but you have one layer on top of another. So if I draw something on this top layer, use red. If I draw something on this top layer, it shows up over the bottom one, but in what they call a non-destructive way. So if I, get rid of that top layer, the black circle underneath is untouched beneath it. And I can rearrange these layers by clicking and dragging them. And that's what I want to do for right now. So what I want is I want my black circle on the top layer and the layer underneath. I'm going to draw some scary red flames here. Okay. And right now that I've got these two layers, I'm going to add a third one on top. So what I want is a blank layer, a second one with my black circle in the second position, and then a third one with some, red flames coming off it or whatever in the bottom position. And with all these three layers in place, I'm going to do the trick that I did before, where I'm going to go up to where you can see the frame in this little animation timeline, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste right next to it, right click, paste again. So I've got three frames that are identical. And if you click through these three frames, you know which one you're on based on which one has the green bar underneath it. If you click through them, you'll see they all have the layers we created, right? Because this icon says add layer to all frames, not just the one that we're working on. And that's very helpful to us. So now, if I go to the top layer for just this middle frame, I can draw over top of it, and it only affects above the little rock in this second frame. And now I can draw something else in the same spot on the third frame, and yet something else in the first frame. And if I hit play, it is a perfect recreation of a falling comet. Another thing you can do is that third layer underneath, you can basically just erase some parts of it, and that will make it look better as well, so they're not all the same. Ta-da! Now this is the same thing I said last time, where right now it's showing us an animation speed that is as fast as the program can possibly run it. Maybe that's how you want it to look, but I think maybe something closer to, let's see, what did I do? 10 frames per second looks a little bit better. Now, obviously, if you want to get more involved, add more colors, it'll look better. But So this is our comet. I'm going to, once again, set the origin point to middle center. And let me pause there and see. I'll give everyone a moment to get up to that point with their animations and everything. Questions, comments, issues from anyone? Okay. So we will create our corresponding object. Create object ob underscore comet. Actually, I think I made it plural. Comets. Link the sprite. And then we just need 2 bits of code for this one. First is when it's created, we want to use this set speed. And for this, we only want to change the type to vertical because we're not going to use this, or at least I'm not going to in my version. I'm not going to use it to move it in any direction other than down. So I'm going to set the type of the speed to vertical. Because it's moving down, I want this to be a positive value, and so I'm going to set it to 10. Obviously, a higher value means it's going to drop more quickly. Lower value, it'll drop more slowly. So that's up to you. I don't know if you can hear my daughter in the background.
MVP in the back, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's bath time. So, yep. One thing that I'm gonna show you in a minute actually could be applied here, which is there's a thing that you can do. Actually, I'll show you here, then we'll do it again in a minute. So so you can insert a function into this value, which is random underscore range, and then parentheses, and then you provide 2 values. So if I do like 2 and 15, let's say. So what this is going to do is every time this object is generated, every time this object is created, it's going to pick a speed between 2 and 15. And if I'm not mistaken, it also does decimal places. So it could be 2.1, it could be 14.9, right? And then that'll be the speed. What this will do for you, this is one of those things where, again, you as the game designer would have to think kind of theoretically, what kind of game do I want? Do I want to make a game where these obstacles fall at a predictable, consistent speed every time? Or do I want them to have some surprise to them where it might be a slower one, it might be a faster one? I'll leave it up to you to explain what are the differences from a gameplay standpoint, from a game designer standpoint, between those 2 approaches. What would be the case for having it be consistent? What would be the case for having it be unpredictable? Anyone? Anybody? Dan, what do you think?
I mean, the chat seems to think that.
Oh, I didn't see the chat.
It seems like they think that some randomness would be interesting.
Yeah, okay. I mean, definitely one way to look at it.
You'd already have the range built in there, so yeah, it should work out, right? You probably don't want to do relative.
Inconsistent could make it more frustrating. Right, exactly. Okay,
that's very true.
Right. So this is a sort of difference. Like, so try to think of the games that you are used to playing. Let's say that you are like, let's say someone is trying to speed run a game. Inconsistency is
The worst thing you can
the
do.
enemy, right? Um,
Right?
they want, like, a lot of times when people approach games, when they feel that there's a skill that they're building, they don't want randomness at all,
Mhm.
right? Because randomness kind of betrays skill. There's no way to prepare for randomness within, reason. But sometimes, as you said first, randomness can make it more fun and interesting. If something falls or behaves in the same way every time, it's potentially more boring. So it just depends on what kind of experience do you want to provide. Do you want something that's more novel, but possibly more, difficult to perfect as a skill, or do you want people to treat your game more as something that they can perfect and get better at
Mm.
over time? Okay.
I think
Yes.
I was gonna say I think a lot of it comes down to the fact of how random it is, because like obviously the range between
Right.
2
Right.
and
Right.
15 is quite a bit. But if it's
Yeah.
between like 2 and 3 for a movement speed of an enemy, that may be seen as just an occasional challenge.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you also have systems like even in Mario where if you hold down a button longer, although I do not know how to code that, that can result in a larger jump. So having different
Right.
types of
Right. Right.
jumps can come to advantage.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. In that case, it's actually giving more control to the player, but at the same time, yeah, a more varied experience. Again, going back to, speed running is a great example because, yeah, imagine a speedrunner who knows every time they push that jump button exactly what the trajectory is going to be. It's a different experience than having to hold it for a precise amount of time in order to get that same um, precision. Okay, so all right, I think we have time to do this last little bit here. Okay, so also same thing where we want a collision event with the player, and you probably know where I'm going with this, to restart the room. And yes, so we should have exactly enough time to finish this. All right, good. So if I just placed this comet object in the room, it would fall once and it would fall forever, and that wouldn't really be great. Um, it would be boring, right? There'd be no, it would happen one time. The player would probably just watch it fall because they wouldn't even be close enough to it and there wouldn't be any challenge. So what we're going to do is create another combination of sprites and objects. So sprite sp underscore monster underscore box. Now, we're not creating monsters. A monster box is kind of um, a typical phrase in game design for an object that creates other objects. And it's most often used to create enemy objects because there's a lot of times in games where, there's one hero and there's many, many enemies, and there's some object that's kind of like just spawning out enemies, right? And they usually call them monster boxes. So it literally doesn't matter what you make this look like. So white box, MB. There we go. There's our sprite. This is not going to be visible. It's going to be outside of the room. So doesn't matter what it looks like. It's just got to be something that when you place it in the room, you recognize it. So yeah, so MB. We need an object that corresponds with it. OB underscore monster underscore box. Oop. Associate the sprite. Okay. And So all we want this to do is we want this to create those comets at a certain interval of time. And we just want it to do that over and over again. So we only need 2 events for this to happen. We need a create event. And in this create event, I'm going to use my assign variable chunk of code here. The variable that I'm changing is called alarm brackets 0. I'll explain this in one moment. And I'm going to set it to 30. So for those that hadn't taken DMS 120, what alarms do, alarms are a kind of an event where it's something that if you want it to trigger, but not immediately, you want it to trigger at a certain time, you set an alarm, right? Just like your clock alarm. You set it for 7 a.m. because you want it to go off at 7 a.m. and wake you up. So this is, you set alarms so that there's a certain amount of time between one thing happening and that stuff in that alarm being executed. So if I set it to 30, this is going to be 30 steps. It's going to count down 30 ticks and then go off. It's going to execute. The way that alarms work is whatever value you give them, they count down from that value. When they hit 0, they execute whatever code you give them. And then after 0, they go to -1. And like I said from before, -1 is like off in GameMaker. So they count down starting at whatever value you give them initially. They count down to 0, they execute what you tell them to execute, and then they go to -1 and turn off. So we need another event here so that they actually go off more than once. So this event is going to be an alarm, and now here's where we pick alarm 0. So add event, alarm, alarm 0. And here is what's actually going to be executed when this alarm goes off. So when this goes off, we want to do 2 things. One is we want to set this alarm. We want to reset it basically. So we're going to set a value, alarm 0. And here is once again where I'm going to use the random underscore range. And I'm going to give it values between 20 and 300. So random underscore range, parentheses, 20, comma, 300, end parentheses. So what this is doing, so I set a starting value of 30. So as soon as this monster box is loaded into memory, it's going to tick down 30 frames, and then it's going to execute this, which, so it's going to go down to 0, and then it's going to execute this, which resets itself to some random value between 20 and 300. And then it's going to tick down from, let's say, 25 down to 0, and then reset itself to another random value between 20 and 300. So now it's going to tick down from 255 down to 0, etc. So now I've created a loop for this object to do something in random ranges of time between 20 steps and 300. But we still need the thing to actually happen. So aside from just setting itself to repeat over and over again, we want it to create an instance. So if you type create up in the search bar here, it's this one that looks like a light bulb. And I'm going to drag and drop it in above my resetting here. And create instance is just like it sounds. We want to create an instance of an object. So when I have all those blocks laid out as our sort of foundation for our level, it's one object, right? The block is just one object, but there are many, many instances of that object. So there's many, many duplicates of that object. Any duplicates of an object we call a new instance. New instances of objects in GameMaker can be manipulated individually, which is great. So, but don't really need to worry too much about that for right now. So we have this little drop-down menu on the right here. We can select our object that we wanted to create, which is the comment one. It's asking us next, where do we want to create that object? If we leave it at 0, 0, it's going to create that object in the most upper left corner of our room, because this is 0, 0, right? And this is like over 200, down 400, right? Then that would be here. But we don't want to create this object at any one place in the room. We want to create the object exactly where this monster box is located. So if we check these two relative boxes, now 0, 0 refers to over and down from ourself, wherever we put ourself. And since it's over 0, down 0, it's just going to create right on top of where we put it. We do want the layer of instances, so we don't need to change that. We don't need to give it a target. So this is all set. And I think that might be everything. So all we have to do now that it's all built, I'm going to drag and drop my monster box object somewhere above the top of our room, because I don't want these ugly white boxes to be visible. So I'll just put them up there. And if we hit play, hopefully now we have a couple different obstacles in our way. Yay. So I set not only do we have a certain amount of randomness for the intervals that they fall, but I also changed some of the speed, right? So some are faster than others. Well, such that some can catch up to others.
Oh, Joe, I don't think your game is showing. We can
Oh,
see.
really?
Yeah, it seems as though it wasn't displaying on the Zoom.
Oh, but it was before, right?
I think so.
That's I asked before. Okay.
I don't know. I think it sometimes does weird things like that. You may just have
No
to
problem.
restart. Okay.
No problem.
Okay, now I think we can see your entire screen. Maybe it's
Boop. How about now?
okay. Now everything's working.
Yes.
Oh, this game already looks difficult. You have all these comments and that.
So, okay, so that's everything for today. So it's up to you for next time. So we've got this whole 5,000 pixels worth of space to play with here, right? So you've got enemies that you can change the speed and the direction in order to get a bigger or smaller loop or a faster or slower rotation. You've got these falling things, and you can change a bunch of stuff with them. Even if you think about, we've shown you how to set direction of stuff, right? So you could even, between now and Thursday, you could change the direction of the comets. You don't have to have them fall straight down. You could have a certain amount of randomness where, it could be a direction within a certain cone of degrees, right? Or should I say triangle of degrees? And there could be, a little bit more unpredictability that way. So there's a lot of things you could change between now and Thursday if you so choose. What we're going to do on Thursday is I'm going to add a starting screen and an ending screen, because at the moment, as we've identified, when we get to the end, the game literally crashes because there's no next room to go to. So I'm going to make a starting screen and ending screen. Once you know how to do that, you can have as many of these playable rooms in between the start and end as you want. So you could have it be just this one level. You could make it 1,000 levels, right? That's up to you. And then the only other thing we're going to do is show you how to add music and sound effects. And then that's it. That's everything. Oh, and I'll show you how to export it, so you can share this with your family and friends and dazzle them at your game making ability.